All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is Left Bank Books welcomes author of one of the millions most anticipated books of 2022, Mark Prins, who will discuss his highly anticipated new book, The Latinist. Prins will be in conversation tonight with founding rabbi of Central Reform Congregation, Susan Talve, and best-selling novelist of 12 Lives of Samuel Hawley, Hannah Tinti. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Mark, Susan, and Hannah, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. We offer in-store shopping, curbside pickup, and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world even. We are happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. We hope that you enjoy this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a signed copy for you or for all of your friends on our website at left-bank.com. I will say that right now it does say that it is back ordered, but that is a lie because we got in more copies today, so it will update soon and say on our shelves now, unless everyone rapidly buys a bunch of copies and we sell out again, which would be amazing. Mark was so kind to send us signed book plates, so we are offering signed copies of the book from Left Bank Books. When you buy a copy from us, it allows us to keep our bookstore and staff operating. So thank you so much for your support. It also allows us to continue bringing you incredible authors as part of our author event series. I am Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from you, the audience, at the end of the event, so please type your questions as a comment. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on YouTube and Facebook to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. And now, about tonight's book, The Latinist. One of the millions most anticipated books of 2022. It is also a CrimeReads most anticipated crime fiction of 2022 selection. Tessa Templeton has thrived at Oxford University under the tutelage and praise of esteemed classics professor Christopher Eccles. And now, his support is the one thing she can rely on. Her job search has yielded nothing, and her devotion to her work has just cost her her boyfriend, Ben. Yet, shortly before her thesis defense, Tessa learns that Chris has sabotaged her career and realizes their relationship is not at all what she believed. Driven by what he mistakes as love for Tessa, Chris has ensured that no other institution will offer her a position, keeping her at Oxford with him. His tactics grow more invasive as he determines to prove he has her best interests at heart. Meanwhile, Tessa scrambles to undo the damage, and in the process makes a startling discovery about an obscure 2nd century Latin poet that could launch her into academic stardom, finally freeing her from Chris's influence. This is a contemporary reimagining of the Daphne and Apollo myth. The Latinist is a page-turning exploration of power, ambition, and the intertwining of love and obsession. Cynthia Dupree Sweeney, the author of The Nest and Good Company, says, "Within the first few pages of this book, I knew I was in the hands of a masterful storyteller. The Latinist is imaginative, propulsive, and wildly intelligent. What a joy to encounter a thriving and singular new voice in fiction." And Maureen Corrigan from the Washington Post says, "Ingenious, a superb literary suspense novel that calls to mind an earlier such debut, Donna Tartt's The Secret History. Like the classics that inspire it, The Latinist is an inventive wedding of the elegant and the barbaric." And now, about tonight's speakers. Mark Prins is a recent graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and a recipient of fellowships from the Truman Capote Literary Trust, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, and the Sun Valley Writers Conference. He lives in Brooklyn, New York. And I will say just a little bit about Rabbi Susan Talve because she has done such incredible work in St. Louis. Rabbi Susan is the founding rabbi of Central Reform Congregation, the only Jewish congregation located within the city limits of St. Louis, Missouri. When other congregations were leaving the city for the suburbs, Rabbi Susan joined with a small group to keep a vibrant presence in the city, to be on the front line of fighting the racism, and poverty plaguing the urban center. Today, she performs life cycle events, leads worship services for the 750 plus households that comprise the congregation, and is actively involved in the teaching of young and adult members. And Rabbi Susan has won a lot of awards and is just an important part of the St. Louis community. So we are very happy to have her with us tonight. From 2010 to 2013, Hannah Tinti was the literary commentator on selected shorts. She is the author of the best-selling books Animal Crackers, The Good Thief, and the 12 Lives of Samuel Hawley. Tinti is also co-founder and executive editor of One Story magazine, which won the AWP Small Press Publisher Award, CLMP's Firecracker Award, and the PEN Nora Magid Award for magazine editing. She teaches creative writing at New York University's MFA program and co-founded the Sirenland Writers Conference. And now, without further ado, I'm so happy and proud to welcome, on behalf of Left Bank Books, Mark Prins, Rabbi Susan Talve, and Hannah Tinti. If you would please help me in giving them a giant round of applause. Hello. There we go. Hi.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Shane. And thank you, Susan and Hannah, for being here with us tonight. I really appreciate it. I'm going to give a short reading in a second, but before I do so, I just wanted to say a few words. Many of you who know Rabbi Susan also knew her daughter, Adina, who was a dear friend of mine. I met Adina when she interviewed me to be a reader for One Story magazine in Brooklyn, where she was managing editor and where Hannah was founding editor. And then we became even better friends when we both left New York City for the equally bustling Iowa City to study writing at the University of Iowa. There aren't many people who can pull off a love of Tony Bennett and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, who can tell such vivid stories about opossums that you feel you've lived them too, who are brilliant writers themselves while still being exceptional literary citizens who encourage the writing of others. And Adina did all of these things. I know many still have the rejection letters she reluctantly sent them from One Story, and I come back again and again to the Jack Gilbert poem that she sent me one night after a long porch talk, which is probably the best metaphor I've ever encountered for my own writing process. In that way, she lives on through all of us who are continuing to try based on her encouragement. Adina was very much in my heart when I was writing this novel, and I just wanted to acknowledge the joy that she brought into my life, as well as the contributions she made to her literary communities in Iowa and in Brooklyn and all over the world. I'm personally so excited for her book of essays, Your Hearts, Your Scars, to be published next year by Bellevue. And I'm very grateful to Hannah and Susan, who I wouldn't know if not for Adina, for being in conversation with me tonight. So thank you so much. I'm going to give just a short reading, and then we'll start with the conversation. Thank you, Shane, for that synopsis, which frees me from having to do the same thing. For the book, I'll just say that in this section, Tessa and Chris are driving to Edinburgh. Tessa has just made the decision to skip her boyfriend's father's funeral because she's delivering a crucially important conference paper in Edinburgh. And she's with her mentor, Chris. She doesn't quite realize yet, or at all really, that he has a sort of predatory romantic obsession with her. So here it goes. Edinburgh. In the months leading up to the conference, Tessa sometimes allowed herself to marvel at her change in circumstance, from truck stop Waffle House to plenary session speaker in 6 short years. Chris drove them in his Fiat, speeding the length of the Isle of England to compensate for the flights they'd missed, casting cigarette butts into the annihilating rush of the open window. We already missed flights, Tessa said, so I could be with Ben when Gabriel passed. This is not something I can afford to skip. Ben understands. I think he understands. Chris nodded and smoked. He listened with solemn intensity, and gradually the conversation became more personal. Maybe she was nervous about the 322-person seating capacity. Maybe she needed weighty conversation to distract herself from the guilt that gnawed at her sleepless brain. Maybe she found in Chris an essential audience for the decisions she had made. But in that journey, she felt herself hovering on the brink of what she did not know exactly. She knew only the trajectory of her life thus far and the imperative of persuading the car's inhabitants of that narrative. She told Chris about the first time she'd heard Ben play music, how the guitar ruffled the air, and then his voice flooded the concert hall with a low vibrato, how she'd felt a chill along her arms and in her heart. The music moved her. Who was he, and how had he just happened like that? Because that was how it seemed to her that he had happened, that the music had happened, in the same way that her most sublime encounters with poetry felt like happenings, lodged in the time and space of her past as deeply and irrevocably as major life events. Apollo and Daphne, her high school graduation, those passages from Blake's Jerusalem, her father's funeral. Soon they were skirting Birmingham, then Manchester, and her thoughts began to spill out to Chris, muddled but constant, as she rolled new cigarettes, white cadaver-like tubes. The important thing was not Ben right now, but her relationship to these moments. She told him how she still possessed the yellowing notebook page on which she'd written her high school translation of those 100 lines of Apollo and Daphne, beginning Primus amor Daphne phobi. How that first encounter with Daphne and Apollo had struck her at her core, made a claim on her, raised her hairs on end, and dragged her soul just for a moment out of her body. As brittle trees on the median strip flitted by, she told Chris how she translated in frondem crines in ramos brachia crescunt as into foliage her hair, into branches her arms developed, and how develop at the time was still being bandied about as a sanitized descriptor for the mutations she and her classmates were undergoing. Her arms had still felt like ever-lengthening noodles. There was apparently certain hair she was allowed to have and certain she was not. She was still growing used to her own odors. Her body had transformed, was transforming, and since it was her first trip through adolescence, she had no reason to think she wouldn't transform into another species next. The euphemisms of sex ed had formed a kind of rip current against the profanity that spilled from music, TV, the lips of her classmates, and she recalled noticing the last 4 letters of the Latin verb, even as she translated it to its most staid English equivalent, crescunt, develop. She recalled something rebellious and alluring about this observation, how language could be layered and insurgent. And maybe it was this that had caused the world to stop and be perfectly articulated in the text. Okay, I'll stop there.
Oh, Mark, that was wonderful. It's so great to revisit that section. And Susan, I'm so glad you're here too. This is going to be a great conversation that I've been looking forward to for a long while. But let's start, Mark, I want to just sort of jump off with what you just read, because I feel like it hits at one of the important, well, lots of different important themes for the book, but starting with the language, right? With language itself and translation. So that feels so important for the whole book. Can you just talk a little bit about your own experience, with language and translation and Latin, which I know you studied?
Yeah. I mean, we can start, the book is called Latinist, so we can kind of start at the beginning. I mean, when I was in high school, I was a big Latin nerd. My idea of fun was translating blocks of Virgil's Aeneid from the Latin into the English, which, as you can imagine, won me many friends in high school. And I think there was some sort of wish fulfillment for me. At some point in my life, I wanted to be a classicist. And when you're writing a novel, you spend so long with that project that you better be interested in what you're doing, because you're basically living another life. So that, love of language and of Latin, came to me when I was really, really young. And,
there's a
you know,
great
then
line
it
in the
just,
book. I forget
yeah.
where it is, but it says when Tessa's talking about why she started studying Latin, and it said because it was the language she could study that she wouldn't have to talk to anybody, because you don't have to, it's a written language and not a spoken language. And so like that was the thing. It reminded me of how like that's actually us as writers too, like because we're introverts and we all chose professions, you know, that keep us a little bit isolated from other people. So it felt like an interesting
allow us
part
to
of the
retreat.
conversation.
Yeah.
But and there's you know, there's so much about
there were
it
so
that,
many things about, you know, creating Tessa's where, you know, you have to figure out what it is about this individual. Yeah. Oh, I think I maybe lost the audio on someone. I'm not sure if mine is
that's
still
okay.
there.
Mark, you're freezing up a little bit, but Susan, you're still good,
hear
right?
me, Hannah or Susan?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, there's just a little bit of a lag.
Am I okay now, or am I still freezing up?
Yes,
you're good.
Yes, you're good. Yeah, I think the language, but also so much research.
Okay, I'm good now. Okay, tell me if it comes back, and then I'll do something when I fix it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Susan, what were you saying?
No, I was saying that the Latin is mind-blowing. The poetry is beautiful. The translation of the poetry is beautiful. And the research that went into this book it really was amazing. It was wonderful on so many levels. So I don't know if you want to talk about how much research and the traveling you had to do.
Right. Yeah, there's and let me know if I'm freezing up again, but there were so many facets to the research, and one of those, you know, elements of it, there's a whole scene or section that takes place in Italy on an archaeological dig site. And I thought rather arrogantly that I could write this just by doing research about archaeology from textbooks or internet YouTube videos, and quickly learned that that was not going to happen. And I found this person in Spain who runs a field school, and, you know, convinced him to let me come along with other actual archaeology students and biological anthropologists. And, you know, I worked for about 2 weeks in the dirt in a 5th century Roman colony with, you know, actually digging up human remains. And that, you know, enabled me to write this section that takes place in Italy. That's a little bit more of an adventure section. But, you know, there were also elements of the research that were just bringing to life characters that, you know, for example, Christopher Eccles is from Hampshire County in England, which is a place that I've never been to in my life. And there are fun things like a BBC Voices oral history project that I spent way too much time with, learning about dialects in different counties of England. And, you know, his mother, who at one point uses the word, she when it's raining, she says it's mizzling. And this is a detail that has like a lot of torque for Chris, because he's not from, he's no longer in the same place that he grew up in. He's from a bit more of a working class background. So he's not around anyone who talks in the same way that his mother does. So, you know, there were little details like that that I was able to pick up from the internet, but some of them, you know, I had to actually go and get my hands dirty.
You know, in Shane's introduction, he mentioned the great review that you got in the Washington Post, which was fantastic, which likened this book to The Secret History by Donna Tartt. And I kept thinking while I was reading it of another book that's a little bit older, or maybe actually it was around the same time it came out, A.S. Byatt's Possession, which is also sort of set in academia, different kind of story, but also, you know, with the sort of different multiple points of view and sort of doing research in this way into language. I just wondered whether or not, you know, what books, were there any other books like that, you know, whether it was Secret History or whether it was Possession, or maybe it was something else that kind of helped guide you or that you were thinking about while you were working on The Latinist?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that question. I mean, Possession was a big influence, and I love that book. And there's so much about the sort of academic one-upmanship in Possession and the adventuring discoveries about dead poets. And we sort of pitched the book as like a cross between A.S. Byatt's Possession and Patricia Highsmith's The Talented Mr. Ripley,
Yeah.
which I thought was fun because I would love to read that book. The Talented Mr. Ripley, Patricia Highsmith was a big influence. I love Patricia Highsmith. In the later drafts, Rachel Cusk was a big influence, which one wouldn't necessarily maybe think from the read, but this sort of cerebral, meditative passages, the rhythms of those and cadences were very influenced by Rachel Cusk and the way she dramatizes consciousness. And then like Ovid himself, I mean, I think that the playfulness and the sort of lack of a moral center was inspired to some degree by Ovid's Metamorphoses, which was, something that I grew up with and which had a big influence, of course, when I was writing the book.
Now, when we met before, we were talking about the mythology in this. Yeah. Susan, you had some questions about that, I remember.
I did. Well, this whole Apollo and Daphne myth and the layers that you introduce of the myth, from the paperweight to, to the actual, and I'll tell you, after our last discussion where, on one level, it's clear it would be a wonderful redemption story. I don't want to give away the end because I want people to be as excited about the end as I was, but it could be a transformation, a metamorphosis of the myth. You could be redeeming Daphne or maybe not.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe she's free.
Yeah.
I started thinking that way too.
Yeah. I think that I didn't want to write a direct, you might say, feminist recasting of the Apollo and Daphne myth. I wanted there to be some sort of valency between the myth and the way that it's enacted in the book. And I think it's fun for readers to be able to do work to see the ways in which Tessa and Chris are like Apollo and Daphne and the ways in which they are not like Apollo and Daphne. But I also think, I someday I hope that I can write like an essay of a close reading of the passage from Ovid's Metamorphoses, because there's so much there and it's so, slippery and subversive and subtle. But I will say that, one of the things that I think it's missing is more of Daphne's perspective. And one of the things that I wanted to do with both Chris and Tessa's perspectives is to sort of imagine, what this male predatory lover consciousness looks like in the present day, but then also, give voice to imagine what the consciousness looks like of that Daphne figure who's caught up in those machinations, and to make that, to give her like the full breadth of that experience and that ambition and that, drive to succeed, when it's taken away from her in very unfair and perverse manner. So yeah, I could talk forever about the myth and what the myth means to me and what it meant to the book, but I think those are sort of the core things that were important to me.
I do think there's something about just because I did something different, but a little bit of the same thing with my last book, where I was using the 12 labors of Hercules to kind of give a structure, and I do think there is something about these ancient myths or, these myths that, from various cultures that are sort of like where we begin, right, in storytelling. That we can build off of and look at different ways. In some ways, it's the same as the Bible or the Torah, right, Susan? It's like, it's about interpretation.
So such an important point. And if you haven't read the 12 Lives of Samuel Hawley, you got to read that one too. It's amazing. And I think in some ways it does the same thing. And here's one thing since you had a rabbi on here, I did before I became a rabbi, worked in Greek and Roman archaeology. And I'll tell you, your archaeology is right on. It's messy, it's imprecise. It's like, oh yeah, let's it's so random sometimes. And yet you get these wonderful discoveries, about the past from people's leftover garbage mostly, right?
Exactly,
but the thing I wanted to bring up is that, and really Hannah was, I think, pointing to this, in these Greek and Roman myths, in Hellenism and philosophy and everything that you evoke, there is a sense of fatalism or fate, right? That we are in the hands of the gods and we are puppets in the way the things roll out. And the whole thing of Judaism and the Torah is exactly the opposite. So early Christianity came out of the Greek and Roman stuff, right? Where you're kind of at the mercy, there's grace, and you're at the mercy of the gods. But Judaism was exactly the opposite. We jump into the story. I mean, Adina. We change the story. We write the story. We are not the mercy of God. We're co-creators with God. So there was this tension for me too, actually in both books, but especially with Apollo and Daphne, trying to figure out are you buying into this myth that we are at the mercy of the of fate and destiny, or is there a little bit of us the Jews, the Torah, that can change destiny, that change the course of our lives.
Yeah,
right?
I think that you're sort of hitting the nail on the head. I mean, I felt at first that in terms of this relationship between the mentor and the mentee, or the dissertation advisor and the dissertation advisee, which for any of those who have been PhD adjacent or PhD students themselves, can be a great thing, but can also be an incredibly smothering thing that can really turn 360 degrees on you if the relationship sours. There's such a asymmetric power dynamic. And I saw this metaphor just being kind of, expressed, or almost expressed on steroids, with these hierarchies of the gods, demigods, mortals in the classic mythology, because they're so ironclad. And so at first it was really fun to just express what that feels like for someone in that situation, where it feels like there is no possible way that you can subvert this power dynamic. But then, of course, me being me and having, the beliefs that I have, which aren't dissimilar to the ones that you were describing, of course, there needed to be some sort of subversion of that, power dynamic. I personally don't believe, and I don't think a lot of people believe, that, those structures are as static or, universal as they may have been believed to be back then. But I don't know if, Hannah, you encountered anything similar when you were writing about Hercules.
For me, it was more like I was trying to figure out how to tell a very complicated story, and so it helped me to to create this. It was more of a structure that I had 12 labors, and so I could tell 12. I was sort of I basically just took them and made them 12 little stories that were sort of skirting through this one man's life, and sort of I was exploring this idea of what does it mean to be a hero. And most of the time, heroes, if you see the Disney version of Hercules is very different than the real version of Hercules, who was a man who murdered his own wife and children. So that's the true story of Hercules, and his story being one of redemption. And what I loved about we talk about this being a reimagining of Daphne and Apollo, but what I loved, as a woman, we were talking about this before, Susan and I, about that you wrote this book from, it feels like a very feminist point of view, but also that you were able to, it's told in two, going back and forth in terms of point of view, which I think is really interesting. First of all, it's really hard to do, to capture two point of views as well as you do for Chris and Tessa. And you're telling sort of, you're in the villain's mind, or the, so-and-so sort of villain's mind, and the hero's mind. And, you feel sympathy for both.
Yeah. I would say, we were talking about these hierarchies, which are often not subverted, but in classical mythology. But one of the really interesting things is that there's often not a clear good guy or a bad guy in these tales. It's often hard to figure out what the moral center is, which is, of course, different from what we get when we see Christianity, and there's like this, very clear divide between good and evil. It wasn't the case. And that's something that I think is authentic to human experience. It's authentic to, how people exist in shades of gray. And, I thought it was important to be able to play around with Chris being a villain, but in some ways being likable, maybe not quite a hero, but Tessa being a hero, but, beginning to do some things that she might not necessarily be proud of to get the things that she wants.
To me, that's what makes a story authentic and makes characters completely human, right?
Yes.
Nobody's 100% bad or 100% good. We're all various shades of gray in this.
Yeah.
And so what I liked about it so much about your book was there were times when I really cared about Chris, and then later I was horrified by things that he did, so it was like this thing where I really cared about it. And then there were times with Tessa, even though she is the hero, of the story, there were times when she did things that I didn't agree with. And so, that I wouldn't have done. And so I just love that push and pull, because to me, that's what makes a character like, I want to keep reading about them because they're really interesting and I don't know what they're going to do next.
Yeah. And I think
it felt so real. I just loved how you captured, I kept figuring, how did he capture her voice so well? You really did. Don't you think, Hannah? I think Tessa's voice felt very authentic as a woman for me.
I agree, and that is very hard to do.
There was a learning curve for that, for sure. I had a funny interview with Alexandra Andrews, the author of Who is Maud Dixon, who was like, if I hadn't seen your name on the book, I would have thought this was written by a woman. And I was like, that's the best compliment you could possibly give me. There was a learning curve, and, there were lots of little things that I did to sort of help. For example, I spent time on Reddit message boards on like female fashion advice and Reddit Ask Women, because there's so many elements of Tessa's material reality that are not elements of my material reality. There's a whole part at the end where she's wearing a shell top, and she's wearing she's wearing a shell top, and this is not something that's in my vocabulary. She's wearing slingback shoes, and I didn't know what slingback shoes were. But when you put a word to the item and it begins to exist in the like fictional space, then it becomes real. And that helped, but it was also for me just like remembering who Tessa is as an individual. In what way is she different from the 3 billion other women who are women, but who she might share some characteristics with, but at the end of the day, there's something at the core of her that makes her unlike anything else except herself.
I have to ask, Mark, did you have, it's funny because like when I wrote 12 Lives, there's a lot of stuff about guns in the book. And I had readers. I had like 2 gun professionals, like a guy who owned a gun store, and then a friend of mine who was in the military read the book to help me with the guns. But did you have any women who read your manuscript to help you with the?
Yeah, of course. And, so many of my readers were women. And so I was lucky that I didn't have to like go out and actually seek like seeking women to read manuscript. Like I had a number of them. And so yeah, I benefited from that immensely. I mean, I had some readers like for some of the, archaeology and epigraphy and all of these weird little subsections of different forms of study that helped with some of the research that I did have to seek out. But yeah, I benefited immensely from readers and people in my like writers community.
There's another sort of part of this storyline, which is sort of, it involves what we've just been talking about, which is people getting credit for their work. And this is happening in the present day storyline. And then we find out that it's also happening in the ancient sort of storyline that is that's going on as well. So let's talk about that a little bit. And is that something, you know, that subject matter, is that like a conflict or something that you really want to, you know, how did that get in your mind to write about?
Yeah, it was, I mean, there's, so some of it, for those who haven't read it, there's, you know, there's this competition or rivalry between, you know, Tessa and her mentor. Both of them are academics. And then there's a discovery about a long dead Latin poet, Roman poet who wrote in Latin. And I don't want to give too much away because there are spoilers there, but, you know, there's sort of a number of things that are learned about who this poet might really have been. And I didn't know that the latter was going to happen when I was first writing the book. I didn't know, you know, about these questions of the poet's identity. That was sort of discovered in the, you know, later part of writing the first draft. And, you know, part of that was just discovering, in my own research, I didn't know how much we're missing from the so-called canon. You know, like, for example, we have these texts that are passed down to us, like the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Aeneid and the Metamorphoses. And one thinks that our scholars or people in universities were just choosing from a menu of everything that was great, and they chose the greatest things. But in fact, one of the fun things I learned in my research was just how much was lost before the printing press was invented, because literally everything had to be copied by these monks in their scriptoria, and all of these monks were Christian and all of them were male. So there was inevitably a certain amount of bias that went into, you know, what was thrown away and what was kept, because it was incredibly laborious to copy manuscripts. And so on the, you know, there are a lot of things we're missing, a lot of poetry we're missing from that era, which was, you know, considered by contemporaries to be the best poetry in existence at that time, which is really sad. But also, you know, as you'll learn when you read the book, there were biases that were, you know, related to gender or other, you know, other potential biases that were in play in these scriptoria and in, you know, the scholars that came later in the Renaissance, et cetera. And when I learned that in my research, it was something that was really striking to me. And I felt that it had to be a part of the novel. So in terms of like taking credit, I think that was just, you know, when you learn something new, you want to share it with people, especially if it's something that like you lived your whole life not knowing and felt like you should know. And so that was, I think, why I wanted to include that bit about, you know, taking credit or not getting credit. This is a long way.
Yeah, go ahead, Susan. I was just going to say, that's a very modern conversation too. It's something that's really important right now. What were you going to say, Susan?
So there are two things. One is, I think there's also this question about, I don't know if men have to deal with this, but I know for women, you know, to give yourself over to being the poet or the academic or the scholar, you have to sacrifice another part of your life. And, you know, that was the question I had, was that going to happen, you know, to Tessa? Was she going to become a nun? Because, you know, that's what nuns did. They you know, you couldn't do both. You couldn't have both, you know. Of course, Tessa's a different generation. But the other thing that's so interesting, without trying to give this away, the article that you said when we talked before, the medical article about the amputation, I think is so important, and how it plays out. And for this, I don't know how much to say, but I just thought this whole body of difference thing that enters into your conversation here is so interesting,
Right.
and how that plays out in women being able to be everything or anything they want to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that there's a lot there, and there's also a lot, maybe that my therapist can explain to me about some of the decisions, some of the things that my subconscious became fixated on. At the end of the book, there's acknowledgments, and one of the acknowledgments is a article from a medical journal about a very particular femur that was found in a Roman necropolis, which led to, a lot of the just like a central through line in the novel for those who read it. And I don't know why my mind kept coming back to that over and over and over again. But it's strange because it really wasn't working at first. And, it took a while to actually build it into the novel so that, it made some sense at least.
Yeah, there's a moment that really stuck with me after I finished reading the book where Tessa is contemplating this, the bones, and how the things that we choose to do actually physically change our bodies.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how those marks on our bodies stay long after our deaths.
Yeah.
And how
I think there's that I got goosebumps.
Right? Yeah.
How our bodies make it.
It's interesting too, because I see so many similarities to the 12 Lives of Samuel Hawley, which is so, you could say, somatic, with the scars that are a part of Samuel Hawley's body, which have become the structure for this novel. I mean, I feel like a lot of these myths with Daphne turning into a laurel tree, which was an image that was so evocative to me that it drove me through a lot of the drafting of the novel. They're so interested in bodies and how bodies transform and how bodies tell stories. And I think that's one of the reasons why they lend themselves so well to, storytelling in general, and maybe even storytelling today.
Exactly. I always say that, there's, the stories of our bodies are like, there oftentimes there's secrets.
Right.
There's secrets that we're holding, and there's stories that we tell to some people and not to everyone.
Yes.
And we tell them to the people that we trust and the people that we love. And so there's something really sort of wonderful about that actually felt was a nice connector to from your work to Adina's work. And her book, which we've been working on over the past, year or two, with her sister Sarika and with the whole family. And then I'm excited that we'll be sharing with everybody next year.
Same.
And this balance between, does the soul influence, the body, or does the body really kind of shape, the soul, and how are they connected? You both do such a beautiful job in both books, and I'm excited about sharing Adina's book too, because I think she does that as well.
Yeah, and I do want to mention, just because we never even got into this, and I know we're going to open it up to questions from the audience soon, is Mark, like, this book is also a thriller. Like, it's almost like it's actually, you mentioned Patricia Highsmith, right? And we've been talking about all the big, ideas about bodies and poetry and language and everything like that, but it's also kind of a page turner.
Right.
And not going to want to put it down.
Yeah. So I wonder whether or not genre crossing was something you were thinking about, or did it just come out that way?
I definitely am always thinking about genre crossing. I remember I wrote a zombie story almost by accident after reading Karen Shepard, and it just had to happen. There was no other way of telling the story. But this one, yes, I was interested in thrillers. I was interested in books that I was finishing that I didn't like. And I found that there were aspects of plot that actually kept me reading. And I was fascinated by that from a reader's perspective. And one of those things was, if a gross injustice has been committed, I had to know how it was going to be solved. And so that, I think, affected the novel. And also, like, I like characters that are a little bit unpredictable and characters with strong desires. And I think it's fun in this novel. You don't quite know what Chris is capable of. And you also don't quite know what Tessa is capable of. And I think you also get this feeling that they're not sure either. And that's really fun to me. And I think it's, you know, it's drama for any literary novel for that to be the case, but it can also lend itself really well to a book that's a thriller, or a book that, you know, yeah, has those more plotty page turning aspects.
Hello, I'm back.
It's back.
I want to thank you all for such an incredible conversation. It was a lot of fun. It was great to find out so much, like so many interesting tidbits and facts about this book. So thank you.
Thank you.
I want to remind the audience watching that we do have books available for sale at Left Bank Books, left-bank.com. They are on our shelves now, so you can order a copy. We do also have copies of The Zodiac Floor by Rabbi Susan Talve that are available and signed. And of course, your book, Hannah, The 12 Lives of Samuel Hawley, that is available as well. So we do have a couple of questions from the audience, so we will get to those. But I want to remind the audience watching, first off, thank you for being here this evening and skipping the Olympics, because I know that is a thing that's happening right now as well. But we do have a couple of really great questions and time for more. So if you have questions, be sure to type those up now. Let's start with Emma's question. Well, actually, I want to share Samantha saying that The Zodiac Floor is beautiful. So there's a nice little plug for you, Susan. But Emma says, this event is so special. Thank you all. And this can be for any of you because you are authors all yourselves. But what would you say is the most challenging part of your writing process, or the most difficult section of the novel? This would be probably specifically, or most difficult section of novel to write.
Mark, what was the hardest part of this to write?
I'll try to be short because I want to hear what you two have to say. But the Italy section I was stuck on for like nine months. It was very, very difficult, but I think worth it when I finally managed to break through.
It's funny because I feel like for different writers, it's different things. And sometimes it's different parts and different times. And for me, usually the hardest part is the first draft. Mm-hmm. Getting that first draft down is really difficult for me. And then that's a struggle, and it's like spitting to fill a bucket. Like it just like feels like just tiny little drops, and it just seems to take forever. And I get very frustrated. And I think it's because my day job has always been working as an editor. So I self-edit, in my brain all the time. When I get to the editing stage, I'm gloriously having a great time, and like time, it's like time. It's like I look up from my desk and like 10 hours have passed, because that's my joyful place is playing around and editing and changing and altering. That's where I'm really comfortable with my writing. So first draft is the hardest. All the drafts after that are usually a pleasure. How about you, Susan?
Well, my Zodiac Floor book is not in the league of these books. It's a whole different thing. But I did kind of write another book that I probably should bring over to Left Banks, and I'll do that. That took about 35 years to write, with a Catholic sister actually in town. It's probably time for me to bring it over to Left Bank. But it's I think the notes for me, and I kind of thought about that when I was reading both of your books, because there are so many references. And talking about attribution, I think for me it's always remembering, where am I getting this from, and who do I have to make sure I attribute it to, and what are the notes that are going to go along with it.
Diane, and this is probably going to give me a little bit of a tongue twister, because I am not. I don't know Latin. I don't know how to speak it, which no one does, but I'm probably really going to butcher this. So Diane says, I'm so impressed that you were able to write your own Latin verses in coliolambic meter. Did you consciously name Tessa after your Marius's line, Te essa amorem, which elates neatly as Tessamorem?
Yeah, I'm glad you saw that, Diane. No, I didn't name Tessa after that line. I was trying to, and I'm sure that real classicists or real Latinists will look at my Latin and be like, ugh. But it was fun to try to write something, to try to write it in meter. And that, elision when the Latin actually spells out Tessa's name was just like a happy coincidence that I felt had to be, preserved in the book.
Yeah, one thing about the book that I forgot to bring up in our conversation was I loved these, and I gotta hold it up, like the actual like the drawings out of the of the different things here. Here we go.
I made you bigger so that I could see.
I know, it's so cool. So Mark, that's so great that they allowed you to do that.
Yeah, they were really nice about it. I mean, maybe there was some grousing that I wasn't exposed to, but they were really accommodating. And, I thought it was important for the discovery phase of the novel to have them.
Yeah, when those first showed up, I was like, ooh, it felt like a nice surprise.
Yeah, and for my friends who are not very literate, I can tell them that there are pictures in it. So they're more likely to finish it.
The poetry was beautiful. Just those poems were just beautiful. And I love that you had, wasn't it her student? Her student that translated. I love that you gave the translations to her student. I thought that was so generous and lovely.
Yeah, Tessa's student Florence is a talented young translator, and those English translations of invented Latin poetry were really, really fun to write, because at that point all bets are off and you're just inventing everything.
It was beautiful.
Which reminded me that I wanted to ask you, I'm sorry, I've got more questions. Shane, do we have ones from the audience? Because otherwise I'm going to keep going.
We do. I'm going to ask Diane's follow-up question, and then we have one from Arnab that I would like to ask as well. That kind of ties into my question, because I have a question too. But Diane says, Mark, you have real classical chops, as it were. Can we hope for more in your future writing?
Yeah, there will be more. I don't know if it will be as much about classicists. I'm sure there will still be some sort of classical and mythological influence in one way or another, but probably we'll move on to other subject matter. But yeah, thank you for this. Thank you for saying that.
Arnab asks, what was the best piece of advice you received from folks that reviewed the manuscript?
There were some very specific things that I got, like move this there, that were helpful. But, ultimately it was talking about Tessa's backstory and getting to the core of her character and her relationship with Chris that were the most helpful directions that I was pushed in by my readers and my editor in particular, to really get at the heart of the nitty gritty and the sort of uncomfortable details with her and her mentor.
So my question kind of plays into that a little bit, because when you were talking about earlier in the conversation about the reviewers and the research, and I was wondering if any of the experts that were reviewers came back and said, oh, like that absolutely could not happen. And a lot of times research can be stranger than fiction. And I wondered if there was anything that you found in your research that you were like, this is so bizarre and so amazing and incredible, but there's no way I could include this in my book.
Yeah, there are definitely some of those things. I mean, there was so much, like there's a character in the Metamorphoses who is turned into an island. And it was so similar to the sort of terminal metamorphosis that takes place for Daphne. And I really wanted to include it in my fictional poetry. And I wrote all of this poetry that doesn't get used. That's fictional poetry written by this fictional poet, translated into English. And yeah, I think some of those poems are things that I'm sad that I didn't get to use, because I thought they were fun, but they just had no place in the novel. But that bit of research was like a fun tidbit that I would have liked to have in there.
Hannah, let's go back to you and some of your questions. We have
Oh,
a
yeah. So
little bit more time.
the other book that I was thinking about when I read this was Anne Carson's autobiography of Red. So I just was curious if you had an Anne Carson tie into this at all.
I actually haven't read that. Crazily enough, it's been on my list for a long time, and I think I just got so submerged with reading other things that I didn't get to it.
But the whole person, there's a lot of stuff about fake. What reminded me was you talking about writing the fake Latin that was then with the translation of it says like her stuff is basically a lot of her work is like autobiography of Red is supposedly is like a fake real thing.
Okay.
It's supposed to be a translation of an ancient manuscript that was discovered. But then when you read it, it's totally modern. And
then I can't believe that I haven't read that, because someone told me someone was like, you must read this given the book that you're writing. And I was like, okay, great, I'll do it. And then I had 1,000 other things I was reading and it didn't happen, but I must.
Just put it on the list. It'll be nice. You'll feel kindred. I feel like this book and that their conversations, like you're speaking to each other, even though you didn't. But I strongly believe that there's like this creative miasma sort of thing that happens sometimes. And when you read a book or when someone, when books connect that way about ideas and things like that, it's just the creative muse, and it's almost like there's a part of you that's connected to that book, which you don't even know yet. Great minds.
Yeah,
exactly. It's all out there. We're all just like transmitters picking it up.
Yeah.
I am resharing the link for how people can get copies of the book. So
while you're doing this, and I thank Hannah and Mark for coming to St. Louis and supporting Left Bank Books, because Left Bank is one of the gems in our community. And the fact that you guys are here with us in St. Louis, I know people probably are all over the place. Adina's friends, I think, our glitter friends are watching, many of them. But I also want to thank you for helping to support Left Bank, because it's a really important part of our St. Louis community.
And thank you, Left Bank and Susan, for sharing us with your community. I appreciate it. And, I am excited for when we can do events in person again, and maybe, can be in person in St. Louis sometime soon.
Always welcome here, you know that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, we were talking about this before. One of the things that sort of, it's obviously sad that we're not all in the same room, but at the same time, the nice thing about, my friends launching books and me doing events like this is it has connected me to a lot of indie books, bookshops that I didn't know about. And now I've become, customers of, because at every, book event that I do or I go to, I'm buying a book and supporting that independent bookstore. So in some ways I feel like, and then I get these lovely packages in the mail from St. Louis or, from Austin or from, Nashville or from wherever these other indie bookstores are. So it's actually such a great, exciting thing to buy a book from an indie bookstore that's not in your state and then have it come to you. So, nice. You should buy Mark's book, you should buy Susan's book, buy mine, but also buy other books from Left Bank's books, and support them. It's so important to keep, these communities alive and thriving.
Yeah.
Did we also mention One Story? Have we mentioned?
Oh, yeah, I did run and grab a copy of it because I realized that I hadn't even grabbed it. So One Story is the lit mag that brought us all together. It's how Mark and I met. It's how Adina and I met, and then how Susan and I met. So this is a literary magazine that we run out of Brooklyn. We're actually, this year's our 20th anniversary, which makes me feel very old. Makes me feel very old. But Mary Beth and I launched it right when we got out of school together. And it's been this great labor of love. So if you like short stories, check us out as well.
Lots of followers in St. Louis. And also, are you still doing the One Teen Story?
Yeah, One Teen Story. If you subscribe to One Story, you automatically get One Teen Story too. And those are short stories written by teenagers, age 13 to 19.
Hannah, can you share the website for
Oh yeah, I'll send it to you. It's very simple. It's just one-story.com.
I knew it was really simple like that. I'm like, it's like, yeah, one-story.com. I shared it in the comments as well, so that everyone has it.
And as long as we're plugging, you might as well say that a One Story did this wonderful fellowship in Adina's name that mentors a new writer every year. And we're in our 4th year. And one of the recipients was a independent bookstore owner.
Right? Yes, Arvin Ramgalam.
Right.
I know Arvin. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Which store? I
So
feel like I
crazy.
met him like 4 years ago. Back
Yeah,
when we were
the
actually
name of
going
the
to
store,
conferences.
it's in Crested Butte, Colorado. And I'm blanking on the name of the store right now, just because I'm on camera, but I'll remember probably in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And he actually won the Adina Talve Goodman fellowship for
He did. I'm going to look it up.
I didn't know it was in Crested Butte. I was in Crested Butte like 3 months ago.
Oh my God.
I just briefly.
Townie Books. That's what it is. Townie Books.
Right.
Wonderful.
Amazing.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to thank the audience for coming out tonight. A lot of really familiar names that were here this evening. So I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening for this incredible conversation. Thank you so much for your support, everyone. So much support in this room for Left Bank Books. And I am thrilled to have been able to do this event. So
yeah, congratulations, Mark.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Susan. I'll hold it up as well. Thank you, Shane.
Oh, great.
Buy this book.
Yeah. Can't wait to get to the end, but then you're not going to want it to end.
Exactly.
And it's so smart. It's a really smart book.
all right. Well, have a good night, everyone. We will see you again really soon.
Bye.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.